who were sitting around doing nothing within a particular community. So for me, I think that's how I see the social contract, to say a shared vision, but also engaging with each other. Because I think at DEG was saying we're a learning organization. This journey that we are taking will need all of us to be prepared to make mistakes. We'll make mistakes, but how do we start to learn from those mistakes as a collective? And for me, that's the social contract that I see happening.
Thank you. Seth.
Yeah. I think the colleagues have answered the issue of the social contract quite adequately. But the only area that I would like to add, as a former official now, Alison, if I sit there in my office, then there's an old lady, very frustrated with her regulatory issues. It takes time, for that building plan to be approved. There are a lot of problems. It's got some weight, but it does not have the level and the extent of weight it would have if it comes from an organized community. I think that's where the social compact comes in, because the issues that we are dealing with here are complex reform and transformation issues, especially from a regulatory policy change point of view. And so the more organized and contracted the community is, the faster I think the changes we are able, to make into the sector. But having said that, primarily contracting must be between that individual, those individuals, basically the tenant and the landlord. But you also need that higher level, a social contracting, more from a reform and a transformation point of view. Thank you.
I think that's the really interesting aspect of it, is the business contract needs to be individual, but there's an enabling environment created by the social contract that also has to be in place and is not as tangible. I'm going to open up the floor for discussions. We have until about 1 o'clock. So discussions, you can pose questions to the panelists or to Ivan or Zama. I'm going to ask if you can please introduce yourself with your name and organization, since we're actually here in person. Thanks.
Good morning. Dion van Zyl, Western Cape Property Development Forum. As Erika said, I think we've many sectors in the room. And again, I'm just fascinated how the formal sector, and I don't want to call this sector an informal sector because it's not an informal sector. It's actually a very well organized sector, but how our different sides actually suffer under the same problem. So if we have to have a conversation about the solution, then the solution must surely be a discussion not about whether the market exists. I think this report confirms the market exists. Massey wouldn't be on the stage if the market didn't exist. So the market exists, the market will be serviced. So the question really here is, how does government catch up with the reality? That's really the only question in the room. Now, just sharing some WhatsApp with Rob sitting in the room as well. I think we've got to separate the debate into two main categories. There is land development and there is top structure development. So if we've allowed our legislation, our planning legislation, our building regulations to muddy the waters. Land development is about defining land, pegging urban, servicing urban, and giving primary rights. Nothing more, nothing less. And by the way, title deed. Okay, so if we just ring fence that conversation on land development, then I think we can dumb it down and we can simplify it. Because like any developer, whether you're a large developer, a small developer, you want to know where your pegs are and what your primary rights are. And let's define the rights that are given with the primary right, which includes a volume, 3-story volume. But we have allowed urban design, environment, all of these fuzzy little, very important things, if you get to the top of the Maslow pyramid, to muddy the waters at the primary level. The primary level is land development. And then we're into a separate conversation on top structure. And top structure should be a conversation about health and safety. Nothing more, nothing less. So if we are serious about fixing the debate and the delivery and getting government to to catch up, then and I don't like the term, but let's use it. We've got to dumb it down to its simple building blocks. The other thing which I've picked up is we fudge the lines between developer and asset manager. Those are two fundamentally different worlds. The developer is the cowboy that goes into the Wild West and breaks ground. He or she is obsessed about building a building. An asset manager is somebody who's going to hold that asset for the next 20 or 30 years. It's a different world. The banks want to talk to the asset manager. They don't like the developers, right? But how do we bridge that world between the developer, the person that's got to do the breaking of the ground, the messy part, and the seamless transition to the asset manager? And maybe that's the way that the bank should be starting to think about the sector as well. What funding is available for breaking ground? And once the building is an asset, how do we refund it to assist an asset manager? Because I think the money is too expensive to the sector. I think the formal finance industry is overcosting risk. The market exists, the delivery capacity exists. What is the real risk? The fact that it can't be taken back by the bank? Well, that's a title deed condition. It's a land development issue. So I think, I'm extremely excited about this sector, and I think we can learn a lot of lessons by fixing the basics in this sector and taking it back into the more formal sector. We must stop messing around with the formal sector trying to fix, Erika, taking all your assets from you or your resources. Let's fix this sector and let's let the formal sector then learn from this sector. But it's land development and then top structure development. We must not think it's the same thing. It's not. Thank you.
Thanks, that's helpful. I'm going to take two more questions and then we'll do some responses from the panel.
Francois Violi, the University of Cape Town. One of the things I do with my students is I make them play the Monopoly game. And then we spend a lot of time trying to find out what the rules are of this game. And we actually spend a lot more time. And then we go through a further exercise of how might we change the Monopoly game to see if we can get different outcomes. Now, the person who played it first and got all the hotels says that's the only game in town. And the other games are not interesting because he or she happened to have done well in that games. And without going into the niceties of game theory and a lot of stuff behind that, the issue is, and I was listening to what was said earlier, are we playing one game here, or are these actually two different games? And it comes to the legislation and the discussion saying, if you have standards, are they sentence standards or other standards? And the question is, should we accept, we have policies in this country for SMMEs, we accept that there are different games in town. And the question is one of the problems that we think that this is one game? And there's a wonderful article that was written about 10 years ago called The Notional Property Developer. What it really came down to is that policymakers have this certain view of the developer who's reading IDPs on a Friday afternoon. And no, I mean, I don't want to be flippant about it, but there is a certain notional view of the developer, and policy formulation reflects the developer. And I think that if there's a misunderstanding of who the developer is, I think we run into risk. So let me stop at this point. But I think the point I'm really trying to say is that, is it one game, or are there different games in town with different rules? Maybe the overlay zone starts getting close to accepting that there are different games in town. Okay, thank you very much.
My brother always beat me at Monopoly.
It's the rules that are more interesting.
Yes, one more question, then we'll let the panel reflect and respond. Please.
I'm Tashik from SCBB Attorneys. I do have a number of questions, but I think I'll narrow down to one at this point. One of the key things that has been spoken about multiple times is the development contributions. Now, development contribution is, I understand, that is necessary for structural financing, right? One of the alternatives brought up was that this get carried over to the ratepayers. Now, for me, it's one in the same thing because of the fact that once you charge that developer the DCs, he calculates that into his costing model and passes it on to that ratepayer anyways. So why are we using that DCs as an upfront thing and not just passing it currently on to the ratepayers? Okay, thank you.
We provoked any of the panel? Of course.
Yeah, Alison, you'll bear with me. I'm not an academic and I don't wish to be one. On the last question, I don't think we need to be asking whether we've got 1 or 2 games. It's clear that we've got 2 games. We've got the formal market, we've got an informal market. The formal market can happen with very minimal support from government, but the informal market needs significant support from government. You need a developmental government to support that market. That's why we talk about the overlays and blah, blah, blah. I'm just raising this issue because sometimes this type of question can be very confusing to some of us. You get my point? And so we need to support this market. We need to enable this market for this market to grow and for this market to thrive. I thought I should make that up, that point. Thank you.
Prof.
So let me come in on the same point because I think it's absolutely critical. I don't think we're going to get away with talking about 2 games and double standards and one for the rich and one for the poor. It's not going to be, it's not going to get anywhere. So it is a big problem, but we have to talk about, I think, progressive upgrading, progressive improvement over time, getting towards higher standards, right? This is the developmental thinking. We've got to build into our system developmental ideas. So when we regulate, we've got to allow flexibility. We've got to allow time. We've got to incentivize improvements. We've got to think that way of incrementally moving forwards to a higher standard, because I think there's no way that the current game is accessible to the informal sector, and there's no way we can persuade politicians and ordinary people that 2 standards is okay. We've got to find a different way of communicating that, and I think the developmental ideas are the way to go. And that means overlay zones, exemptions, flexibility, progressive movement towards standards. I know it sounds messy and complicated, but it needs to be articulated much better. But I think that's how we've got to think about it.
Erica.
Okay, so I think also just in terms of the last question around development contributions, I think that's where the discussion around land value capture becomes so important, looking at the different models that the city can use in order to fund its infrastructure. So it's also another area where I personally believe that the city can change quite a bit and maybe implement a whole lot of reforms, because at present, sorry, the system is that the developer basically pays upfront for that infrastructure to be upgraded to cater for the increased rights of a property. Whereas we all know that the city, through its various grants, through debt financing, etc., actually have the means to put in that infrastructure upfront and can recover it through its rates base, which is more like tax incremental financing. It's a discussion that we have started in the city with our finance team, There are a whole lot of financial reasons why the finance team, would like to look in a bit more detail at the various types of financing that is available and how we do it, understand the implications of all of that before we come with any real proposals. But I think that is definitely, on the cards around support of the financing reforms that we have to look at as well.
More questions?
I'm going to read one from the chat quickly online, if I may. So this is a question from earlier from Zanotolo to the prof and to Ivan. Thank you for such exciting research findings. May I ask a question in relation to your findings and scenarios? If the rates of return for fully complying are so low, this may incentivize greater non-compliance. Should the city, under these circumstances, not consider strategies to increase the value of compliance? For example, offsetting the development costs where the development may contribute to other socioeconomic goals such as proven job creation and local SMME engagement, which builds local economy and affordability levels. Alternatively, can the city consider amending the rigidity in its bylaws and building plan regulations to counter the unintended consequences of non-compliance due to poor rates of return or cost motivation?
There was a question up. Sorry, can we take the woman in the front first and then yourself? Sorry, ladies first.
Good afternoon, all. Mine is not really of a question, more than a bit of comments here and there. First of all, my name is Cynthia Mukuma. From Bukoleto Holdings. I do property management within the space of the so-called micro developers, or whatever. I'm not sure which informal or formal, yeah. And I'm also the secretary of the Township Developers Forum. Truly, we are not asking anyone to give us handouts in terms of what we do. We are here in this space to ask for an assistance to compile, to be able to do what everybody's doing, but in a less stringent and more accommodative, seeing that these things are expensive. And we are just saying that, seeing that we mushroomed and we are here, what best ways can the city and everybody that's a stakeholder in this business assist us to be able to have, at the end of the day, our buildings have proper insurance? Mr. Monzi is almost 4 million. And that is not just him, other people, 2 million, 3 million, and they cannot put that as an asset because it has no insurance. They cannot go to the next project and put that as a surety because it's not there. So what the reason, one of the reasons why we formed this forum was to say, we are here and we are not going anywhere. The city needs to assist, and everybody that's a stakeholder in this needs to give a hand and assist where possible to make sure that Dion said last week or 2 weeks ago in the conference that we had at ICE at the convention center, he said that it's about health and safety. Those are, we must depart from that these buildings that are mushrooming in Kailija, Pumele, wherever, we must start from the point of health and safety. Then from there we can go. And then the fact of whether it's a two game or it's a two stream, I'm not quite sure if I got the gentleman right. Again, we are not saying that make things easy for us. We are saying that assist us the best way that you can to bring us up into a standard that the city will say that if you go to Khayelitsha, we can stand at the city and say we were there or we came on board and we assisted, and those people are safety recognized and safety and health in terms of the buildings. Then the last one, social contracts. I'm part of the social contracts. I'm a property manager that is employed at Mandalay under JM Holdings, which is funded by TAF 21. And I've been there now for, this is my 3rd year. And I have been operating in that space before they came, managing different sites there. And it's not just me. We've got cleaners, we've got maintenance people, we've got, and when we do maintenance of the buildings, we take people from the communities to come in and do the maintenance. Even electricity, we take people that have companies, registered companies, that are within Khayelitsha to come and assist there. So social contracts are there. It's just that they might not be in pen and paper, but they are there. Lastly, I had so many things here. Lastly, you know, if you can take the developers and put them in one roof and ask them one simple question, what do you need us to do? They will tell you that they will tell you what makes them not to comply. They will say that I submit my plans and there's a back and forth. And out of that back and forth, the funder or the funder is already wanting me to service the bond. And I'm under pressure to service my bond because where am I going to get 59,000? So I have to start. But not as if I did not submit my plans. I have submitted my plans. It's just that the city has got a secretary of the secretary that assists the other secretary and assists the other one. And that's a whole lot of things that we need to. And then lastly, how do buildings mushroom when you've got inspectors? Do you call them inspectors? City of Cape Town, how? That is the first thing before asking us whether we've got two games or two groups of people or we've got the poor and the rich. How does Khayelitsha or Mfuleni, whatever, that has City of Cape Town offices that have got inspectors, property inspectors, have buildings that are mushrooming day in and day out without them knowing that those buildings are there? So the problem at the end of the day goes back to those offices of City of Cape Town that they are not giving people information. They sit at the offices. They don't go out and say, look, we will do a road map or whatever it is, just to educate people on these things before they go to do these things. We know that we've got backlog of houses, but why is it that the City of Cape Town is not championing the information sessions within our communities to make sure that people, they know, if I decide to invest in this industry, these are the things that I need to comply with in order for me to be able to play in this game. And this is what we are doing with DEG. We are taking Tribunal of the Western Cape to Khayelitsha to do these talks so that tenants, after everything is said and done, tenants are not being abused, landlords are not being abused. So we are bringing everybody in to share the information so that by the time people start to engage, they already know the information about how to engage. Yeah.
Thank you. I see two more questions after. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much. Ndingu Pangalele Madala, that's my name, from Pangalele Building Consultants. I am not sure whether is it going to be a question or a comment. Mainly it's directed to the city. One other thing probably it's on the issue of land. There are lots of pockets of land that are within our spaces that they are being owed by the city. And even if you go and apply or make an intent to buy that portion of land, the city will refuse you. And what happens afterwards? The people, you'll just utilize that space because it's a dumping space, which is next to your property, and it's got a negative impact in what you have invested on in your. If the city could also consider releasing those pockets of land so to those people that want to buy them. Secondly, I think it should be added in those recommendations that when they consider these relaxations, they should consider also the mixed-use developments, because at times it doesn't help to develop only the accommodation spaces without any sort of commercial. We have a lot of spaza shops that are informal, yet if they need spaces in a formalized manner, that acts as a security in my complex that I've just built, because when all my tenants are out, it's quiet, yet if I have that commercial space that is occupied within that, that also impacts on economically, because the person that is running that, she or he is employing someone within the space to run the business in there. And also, I think this is crucial because we can have these talks at this level up until the city comes up with a clear directive to say, how then are they going to take this, filter down this information to those people that are on the ground enforcing these regulations? Because what is frustrating mostly is that you as an inspector, you get told that this is the regulation, this is what you've employed to do to enforce this. Yet, even if you see that this is something minor that you could have used your own discretion to say, yes, this can pass, but because the regulations are so stringent that this is what needs to happen. So I would really appeal to the city that they do take these, whatever, all this journey with their staff to understand where we're going. And lastly, I think it was a matter of which was highlighted here that if some of those officials can leave those comfort zones to go to our areas, engage with our communities, because while we have so many mushrooms of developments in some of the spaces, because some people honestly, because of frustration from the plans, it's land use management from BDM, plans are not, we're not getting proper feedback, etc. Then you so decide that, look, time is against me. I'm going to use this money that I've set aside for this. Let me rather start something. And yet, if there was this set up in our communities that people that want to develop come, these are the sessions that are catered for you. We as the city are willing to come on board, and that would assist those guys that are on the built environment space to be able to engage and to say, these are the frustrations, because if you are also on the built environment, you are a technician, a competent person, you don't want to bombard the examiners with those emails to inquire, we have submitted a plan, what is the progress on that? Because you end up being marked, and then they would target you in other future projects. I know with Charles, when I was still at the city, I used not to understand why he was so supportive in the people that want, that to comply. Yet within us, there is a regulation that is blocking us in making the plan progresses. But now I see the bigger picture where you was going. And thank you so much.
There was a question, yeah. Then I'm going to let the panel respond, and we'll take one more.
Thank you. I've got a comment, but it's going to end up with a question as well. No, I've got a, yeah, a comment, yeah. So I think one of the presentation that was,
Could you introduce yourself?
sorry, my name is Filat Matiashe from Development Action Group. So one of the presentation that we saw, I think it should be from Zama, it was talking about the need to avoid killing the goose that lays the golden egg. And I've got a practical issue that sort of leads towards the risk of killing the goose that sort of lays the golden egg. And it's around the issue of penalties for non-compliance. But I think today we have heard about incentives that lead into the compliance. But then I think what is equally important is sort of balancing it out with, especially for the entrepreneur developers who might have 1 or 2 buildings already that are non-compliant. You know, giving them some incentive for future projects is good, but dealing with the penalties for the stock that they already have can, to some extent, poses the risk of financially crippling them. And the issue is, what are the current thinking, if there's already plans around dealing with that difficult scenario? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jens Horber from the Sunday Institute, and we're partnering with DAG on a lot of projects. I have 3 extremely quick comments / questions. The one is around the cost of building materials. Is there an opportunity to kind of look at how we can lower the cost of building materials? I mean, it's not only around alternative building technologies and the recognition in terms of building relations around those, but in terms of both sort of promoting local manufacturing of building materials and just perhaps sort of incentive or subsidizing access to materials to kind of at least reduce that cost driver. The second point is that I think we also need to be a bit more gender sensitive about supporting the small scale development sector, because it seems to be that a lot of small, in terms of our research, is a lot of small scale subsistence sort of backyard developers who just kind of add on a structure are actually like middle-aged women, but then sort of the developer space, the small scale developer space seems to be like reasonably male dominated. So how do we kind of enable sort of women to kind of enter the space? My third, actually, I've got 4 points, but I'll be extremely quick. The third one is around like the whole idea of a social compact. I think in some ways the city can demonstrate its commitment to a community through upgrading of public space, through improved services, because in some ways, like in Dunoon and other places, it's actually an absence of governance, an absence of sufficient level of services. So in some ways, the part that the city can play is demonstrating like what it can do. And the importance of that is in terms of asset creation. If somebody is developing their own plot, obviously, like that's their asset, but like the value of their asset is also increased by sort of like the public investment. And I think we can be a lot more creative around that, especially in terms of safety as well. Like my last little point is a lot of small scale development is still happening in areas that are not very well spatially located in terms of spatial transformation. In some ways, we are supporting housing production in terms of small scale development, and that's extremely important, but it's still happening sort of in less well located areas. So how can we sort of like support the small rental sector to be able to build in better located areas? And obviously there's a lot of issues around that, but I think that's an element of the conversation that we have to have it as well. My last little point is that we're actually doing research on self-build at the moment and how to support that. And an element of self-build is also sort of in terms of informal settlements. A lot of people, if they can receive tenure security, are able then to invest in incrementally upgrading their own structure. But how do we link and support small-scale development to that informal settlement, incremental upgrading space, and especially in terms of our national housing policy shifting a lot more to site and service and leaving it to people to self-build. Like we need to think in a more integrated way instead of looking only at small scale development in brownfields areas, in more formal areas, but also in informal settlements. Yeah, because otherwise land release and informal and top structure development is only going to happen in greenfields areas, and that's just going to incentivize urban sprawl. So we basically have to look at densification in situ as well in different ways. I apologize for hogging the microphone.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give the panel a chance to respond. We had a question from the chat about the rate of return, specifically on how to increase the value of compliance. There was also a question around releasing pockets of land and focusing on the mixed use as well as residential use. There was a question around the penalties for non-compliance and what role the stick plays in this process, not just the carrot. And then also the cost of building materials and the gender aspect as well. Anybody like to pick up on some of those? Start with Isanda and then Zama.
I can just comment on a mixed use one to say that we see that in Soweto, that works very well for a scheme to be more feasible. So when you have commercial space on the ground floor, it helps to sort of cross-subsidize the development for the investor, and the returns are better. But it also helps with the point the gentleman made around local economic development and job creation and presence and safety. So I think that it also creates better urban environments when you have the ability to go and do your laundromat in the building next door, or to go and buy your milk in the building next door. So I would agree that if the city could look at how, in its planning requirement, it allows for this mixed use development, because that obviously makes things a bit more feasible. And on the gender issue, the company that we use to finance in townships is called Umastandi. Umastandi in Xhosa Zulu means the female stand owner. So it's about actually wanting to support more formally women to get into this portfolio growth in terms of their property assets, and not only having the one house where they build rooms at the back, but rather build this development and that development and that development. And currently we have almost an even split in the clients that we financed around the country. And, it's not where we wanted to get to. We wanted to see women being maybe 60%, because that's the name of the company, but there's still obviously the nervousness from us as women to kind of take up these challenges of construction and dealing with construction mafias and dealing with people demanding jobs and making sure that your slab is right. You don't always even understand what's being said. And we find that what is helping is when you provide finance, it must come with a package of training and mentorship and hand-holding. You need to be able to work with that client and mentor them in terms of what's expected of them, what does this asset mean from a property management point of view, etc. And we provide some of the training with UCT. Professor Francois here will tell you how active these entrepreneurial conversations can get amongst the groups themselves, and they can learn from each other. So I think slowly we're starting to see more women getting involved, but not as many as we would like to. And it's certainly something that we need to support as a country moving forward.
Thank you. Zama, did you have a response?
Look, I would like to.
Oh, sorry, please.
I'd like to respond to the question of land. I think one of the biggest frustration, I think, for most property developers is the access to land. If we look around in most townships, largely in less affluent areas, you'll find that there is no pieces of land to develop. It's also encouraging to hear that the city is also looking at some pieces of land available so that the developers can be assisted. But I just hope that it's not just a talk; it will translate into practicality. You'll find that in most of these areas where the emerging developers are participating is that there is no land at all, unless you move outside of the township, where you'll find some pieces of land, and they're quite pricey. As I wish that as we continue to engage with the city officials, it's something that we'll look at. It's not going to be just a debate that is taking place at a national level. I know there's this big question of the land question, but we're not there yet. That is being discussed at the national level. But it frustrates most developers to see that even when there is potential of funding, chances are you're not going to be able to develop unless you buy. It's the kind of like a run-down building. If you're lucky, then you can demolish and rebuild, as some of the developers have been doing. But we really need to look at some pieces of land that are available, so that the city can maybe assist. Even in I'm sure most developers are willing to pay, because the private landowners are charging quite hefty prices for these pieces of land. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think for me, I'll talk about the material, building materials. I think just to say, acknowledging that this is Tomi from PHP National is here today. And for me, I think this sector has got the genes of a PHP project. And within PHP projects, what we're doing is we'll identify, scan the environment and see who supplies material within a specific area. And that's what we also encourage these developers to do. Who's doing bricks within your own community? Who's selling sand within your own community? Who's doing welding work within your own community? And by doing that, we'll cut the cost of transporting. I think one sector that I think was guilty as charged as DEG. Yes, we have engaged with different sectors, finance institutions, government, but Kuma, we still need to go and engage with material suppliers. The Kairicha PHP was a success because we partnered with Buco, who provided materials to the contractors. And I think even with this one, how do we start to engage with the big material suppliers? They are in our townships. How do we start to engage with them and be responsible and play a role? I think the other one for me, I think, which is linked to what was also asked, the issue of where to invest. I think as part of our support, we started a Facebook page called Affordable Places to Rent in Cape Town Townships. Quarterly, we produce reports that tells us where people are looking for accommodation. A tenant will post there to say, I'm looking for accommodation in Langa. This is the amount of money that I have, and these are the amenities that I'm looking for or I want to be close to. And those reports are also assisting us as DEG are also assisting the developers, because the developer can start to say, oh, okay, the market is moving from Mandalay. Now the market is targeting Langa. How do I start to identify those city pockets of land sitting vacant in Langa and start to approach the city to say, look, here's the piece of land. Is it suitable for housing opportunities? Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great example.
Okay, so I think just responding to a couple of issues, I think a lot of it relates to the city. I think we need to recognize that this is new, okay? And it's new to the city, and it's a new approach in terms of how we do things. So we don't claim to have all the answers yet and know how to do everything at this stage. We are learning through the process. We have committed in terms of many of these recommendations, as well as some additional ones. As I've said before as well, we appreciate these kinds of inputs where, you know, we can learn through the process and also see what works and does not work. So we definitely do not have all the answers at present. We do appreciate the input from everybody around how we can improve in terms of our processes as well. I think just, you know, and it touches on the enforcement issue, but also in terms of the social compact. So I'm sure everybody here understands how the city works and the city finances work.
Does anybody understand?
On a very basic level, okay? So not the complicated one, but basically, obviously a city is made up of a whole range of properties. Those properties pay rates in terms of the property value. And what you can use that property for, and then obviously you pay for the services as well. And that is basically, and don't go and quote me to any of the financial teams, because there are lots of different ways of financing and funding and all that kind of stuff. But the basics of it is you've got your asset base that pays rates and services, and that is what you have to reinvest. That together with some grants that you might get from national government on various things. So for a city to continue to thrive and to be healthy, that whole cycle needs to work. Because if you've got the more properties you have, the higher value that you have in properties, the more rates do you collect, the more money do you have available to put into other services. You can put into the upgrading of the public spaces. You can put into social facilities, you can put into a whole range of other things, okay? So it's very important that that cycle continues to work. So I just want to put that into perspective, because, you know, there are concessions around development contributions, around building application fees. That is paid for from somewhere, okay? Which means at the moment the rest of the residents of the city is subsidizing that whole process. Which we think it's a valuable investment. I'm just saying that, you know, that's the cycle. So for us, it's very important that these types of developments also get into that cycle where these properties are formalized, they've got formal building plans, they start to pay rates, they linked into the services, so we pay services, electricity, sanitation, etc., so that those systems don't get abused. Because I think Zama's presentation also earlier showed, for example, the noon. We don't want, you know, people building over manholes so that we can't get to a sewer in order to service that infrastructure. We don't want those kinds of situations to happen. So that's important for us. So even though we are giving a lot of incentives and concessions, I think, you know, there's also always that balance that we have to say, where's the return coming from? Because at the end of the day, you know, the other ratepayers are also demanding certain services for the money that they pay. In terms of the social compact, I think it is incredibly important for us that, you know, people in a community, for example, if a developer or a property owner who participates goes through this process of formalizing their development, putting in building plans, etc. I think we're also going to depend quite a lot on the community to then report, to say, but why is the person down the road doing this without the proper authorities in place and the proper building plans, etc. Because if I had to do it, then that person also needs to do it. Because we can't be in every property all the time to see what is happening from our point of view. So, and it's a weakness, and I admit it, that in many instances we are reactive. We respond to when we receive complaints, or we receive queries, or we receive reports about illegal building going on, or people are saying, what are those people doing on that property? And then we can go and investigate and see what is happening. So I think the social compact is also going to be quite important, where, you know, we hold each other accountable, and residents in an area also start keeping each other accountable, and how we then start to spread that message about what the process is, what the benefits are, you know, how it can work a lot more efficiently. So we can do that. But just also maybe to note the issue around the admin penalties. We are working on that as well as one of our initiatives. So we are proposing to send a report through to mayoral committee and council quite soon. And the intention is that we will also then ask for exemption from paying admin penalties on existing buildings that do not comply in the process when they intend to comply. So if they submit the applications to formalize and to regularize, that we consider the exemption from the admin penalties. That doesn't take away the responsibility that if they don't do that, you know, obviously we still take the necessary law enforcement action that would be required. So that's very imminent in terms of implementation as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Erica. I like how you actually pulled it back together in terms of showing us the ecosystem again. Ivan, I'm going to give you the last word. I apologize. We don't have time for more questions, but please make use of the lunch space to chase somebody up and pose the questions. Ivan?
Thanks very much, Alison, and thanks for the really interesting comments, questions, discussion. It's been very fruitful. We need to have more of these conversations, is my first point, both on the technical matters, and there are lots of technical complications here, but also on sharing understanding of situation on the ground. That's very important, that city officials, people working in communities, you know, are communicating and sharing their knowledge and understanding of what the challenges we face are. The second point, I want to respond to what Erica has just said about, you know, the social contract, because I think, in my view, we want to get into a situation where people understand that there is a kind of deal there, right? So it's not just a culture of demanding from government. There's also recognition that people have an agency and have a role to play. But the city also needs to be much more sensitive, responsive, less heavy-handed, and also get into that, get more of a negotiated relationship in the way that it deals with people. I think it's a mind shift change. And among many officials, you don't see much sign of that. In parts of the city, it's very uneven. That's a challenge. The city has to be more empathetic to our poorer communities, and it needs to demonstrate its commitment, I think, more seriously. And it can do that in tangible ways. I like that point very much about the public realm, public spaces. It needs to invest. It needs to maintain. Is not just put in the initial capital investment, maintain these places with, you know, visible presence on the ground. That will help to persuade communities that the city is a partner, is, you know, part of the situation. When you saw those quotes, lack of visibility, you know, that's very scary. If the city is invisible, it's a big problem. I think the third point I want to make is that this is not just about deregulation. The temptation, I think, for politicians is to see this as a quick win. We simplify, streamline, deregulate, get out of the way, this thing will just take off. And I think it's not going to work very well if that's the city's approach, just to get out of the way. It needs, and this is, I think, a response to the chat question, how to make it worthwhile for developers to comply. It's partly making it easier, simplifying, streamlining where that's possible while protecting health and safety. But it's also the positive agenda of making these better places, more valued places through urban management, through investment. And we haven't talked much about precincts, because I think when it comes to mixed use and so on, that may not necessarily be on the site, but it may be within the precinct that you have. And on the high streets, you may have on the ground floor commercial space, on the upper floors residential, thinking about it in a more coordinated way. And I think the planners have a big role to play there, working with communities, talking, engaging, consulting with developers and other actors to try and start thinking about precincts as the way forward to create more valuable places that are more livable, safer, and all this kind of high road scenario. That's what we had in mind, thinking about that, not just working at a plot by plot level, but thinking about precincts and streets and transport connections and all the infrastructure that goes to make a really viable and attractive neighborhood.
Thanks, Ivan. Okay, I need to wrap up. I want to thank each and every one of the panelists for your time and for your input. I think it was a nice diversity of views, and we got to some of the practicalities and not the high level talk. I'm going to hand over, I believe, to Wilhelmina. Yes? To do a thanks.
I've just hugged somebody who I haven't seen in 32 years. Sorry, Alison, I just couldn't avoid saying that. Prof. Ivan, I think your remarks, we should have ended there. I liked what you said just as much as I liked reading your Maverick article, your Daily Maverick article. So thank you very much. When Kathy said this morning that I'd agreed to do the thanks or the closure, you heard my voice under duress. I mean, it kept me up whole night because this was a last minute request. I'm the chair of the board of directors of DAG, and I'm a very proud DAG board member. I don't think I can say I'm a DAGgy because those who are employed by DAG and still employed by DAG call themselves DAGgy. Like our ex-director who's here today, and I want to acknowledge him. He's now a DAGgy. I'm not here to regurgitate the discussion of this morning. I think so much has been said. So much has to be taken in. And I think we're ready now to go and eat and mingle and talk and meet people who, I must say, some interesting people in this room who I met at the coffee table. So I'm just going to end by speaking and making closing remarks on behalf of this remarkable, remarkable team of DAGgies, led by Kathy, our new director. Not so much new, but Kathy, you have an amazing team of workers, of people, Helen and Zama. The one thing that we took on this year, it's like a mantra in DAG, is that we need to be aware and we need to nurture our young professionals. And so I want to just make these closing remarks on behalf of the young professionals. So I'm going to read it. with my reading glasses. So this report has shown and documented the essential role that micro developers play in the provision of dignified, affordable, small-scale housing in well-located neighborhoods in Cape Town. Grounded in the extensive work of the Academy, that's the Construction Development Academy, the report establishes a more nuanced understanding of the realities on the ground and highlights the diversity of small-scale developers and their differentiated needs and capabilities to grow and formalize. The report also makes the clear point that small-scale rental housing is changing the character of South African cities and helping to solve the housing crisis we face. Homeowners and micro-developers are investing large sums of money in better quality brick and mortar flats. Brick by brick, they are altering the physical fabric of townships and providing sought-after affordable rental units which neither the public nor the conventional private sector supply. The report is also groundbreaking in that it creates a vision, the high road scenario, by highlighting all the opportunities and public benefits that the small-scale rental and sector offers. We see in very real way how townships can become sustainable and vibrant neighborhoods. What is becoming clear from the caliber in the room and from those who are online, I believe that we have quite a lot of people online. So what is becoming clear from the caliber in this room today is that the potential is being recognized. This is wonderful because it is also clear that micro developers alone cannot build sustainable neighborhoods. The state and local government play an important role in shaping urban development. As the report clearly shows, the hurdles and barriers faced by micro developers which prevent formalization of the sector. It also shows that different hurdles affect different kinds of developers. Give me a minute. Rather, all of us are standing at a fork in the road, and it will take everyone in this room to walk down the road less traveled, as Zama said, together in order to get to the high road scenario. It will take regulatory reforms and incentives to be implemented at both local and national level. It will take administrative reform of local governance systems coupled with closer, more hands-on local support. And most importantly, these reforms can only be successful if the communities of these neighborhoods are centered in this process. That is one of DAG's mantras. And I'm going to repeat it. It can only be successful if the communities, the people of these neighborhoods are centered in this process. It will take continuous conversations and genuine engagement with communities on the ground. Micro developers and township communities themselves need to be continually centered in this journey. As DAG, our role today and further down this road is to advocate for this kind of meaningful participation. We will do it now, and we commit to keep doing it. Today's event was an exciting first step, as Kathy said, one since the pandemic. So today's event down this road of collective action, and we would like to thank the speakers, the organizers, and all of you who have taken the time to attend here and to come online. We want to thank you for your enthusiasm and commitment. And once again, I want to thank Kathy and her team, and especially those who have worked on this project. I want to thank you for all your hard work and making us all very proud here today to say that we belong to DAG. So I want to thank you and enjoy your lunch. Thank you. Lunch is served.